when you're incarcerated and you're going through whatever that process is of bettering yourself and changing yourself and becoming a different person, people out here are doing the same thing in the free society. People are going through their own process of evolution, or they're changing, or they're going through whatever the hardships they're experiencing. But remember that people are changing out here as well, and we have this ideal of what our family will be like once we return. But once we're here, it's like a totally different picture.
Welcome to the Path Forward podcast. My name is Augie and I am your host. And my guest today is Yaacov Delaney, and we are sitting here in Chicago. And I was thinking this morning, knowing that he was going to be on the podcast when we actually met, and I had received an email inviting me. This was for an organization of formerly incarcerated people. And I was just out at this point. In fact, I think I was still in the halfway house when I got the email, and it was from Yaacov. And I don't know, I had been going to different groups and meetings. And so he must have picked up my name somewhere, and he invited me to this breakfast meeting. And I went and met a lot of great people. And he was actually there to greet me, but it resulted in me being involved with Rocky, and ended up going down to Springfield and learned a lot about the work that was being done at the state level to try to make the pathway for people that are returning from incarceration, so that there's an opportunities available, and the essential things like housing and those other types of services. So Yaacov, welcome. Thank you for your time. Thanks for being here. We haven't seen each other for a while, so it's good to be with you.
Yeah. Thanks for having me here. It's a pleasure and an honor.
Glad to have you here. So I'd like you to start, if you would, and just kind of, tell us your background, where you grew up, what you did, and kind of lead up to the time that you became incarcerated.
Sure. Thank you again for having me here. I'm Yaacov Delaney. So I grew up on southwest side of Chicago. I was born on the west side of Chicago. My mom and my dad ended up moving us to the southwest side of Chicago, um, in a Chicago housing project called Leclerc Courts. And so it was a low income, disinvested community. And I always say that I first came into contact with the criminal justice system like during that time period. I probably was around 7 or 8. After my dad came home from serving in the army, he had a heroin addiction, and like complications from that led him to prison. And so now my mother, which was his wife, is raising 3 young boys on her own in the Chicago housing project area. My dad comes from a big family. My grandmother had 14 children, and 11 of those children were boys. So I had 11 uncles, 3 aunts, and so I often navigated like the southwest side of Chicago and the west side of Chicago, visiting my uncles. And a lot of my uncles were leaders and members of one of the gang organizations in Chicago. And so I grew up seeing a lot, although they didn't recruit me into the gang organization, being a young black male and like wanting to emulate other black males in my family. It was sort of just, I learned who they were, what gang organizations they were in. And so I emulated that. I also was in the top of my class at the same time. Going into high school, I was played baseball a lot since little league. That was my favorite sport, and so I always dreamed of like being a professional baseball player growing up. And going into high school, played baseball for my high school, but also I had joined the gang, and so I had started like selling drugs, using drugs. By the time I was probably in my second year of high school, I had become full fledged in the gang. Started like cutting classes. As a result of cutting classes, my grades started dropping. Since my grades started dropping, I got kicked off the baseball team, and so now I dropped out of high school and was like full fledged in the streets. Um, Turning 18, I was a victim of gun violence. Went from selling drugs to now robbing drug dealers. And it was in one of those incidents of robbing drug dealers that another young black male lost his life. And now I am 19 years old, facing life imprisonment with a 1 year old child now. I was a teen parent as well. And it was during that period that I really started like reflecting upon some of the choices and decisions that I had been making up until that point that led me to now be facing life imprisonment as a 19-year-old person.
And so you went into is it the state system?
Yeah, yeah. I was subsequently convicted and sentenced to 45 years. And so now I'm 20 years old, being sent down to Stateville State Facility, which is a state prison in Joliet, Illinois. At that time, this was one of the most violent prisons in the nation. And I actually, like, just being candid, at that point in time, I did not even see myself being released from prison. As a 20-year-old, I was sentenced to a 45-year sentence. My mind, what my mind perceived was that that was a life sentence for me. I did not even see myself getting out of prison. But it was, but still within me, I still wanted to make some better choices and decisions. And so I started. I enrolled myself in a GED course. Got my GED probably like within a year of me being down in the prison. Uh,
I'm sorry, can I
yeah,
ask a question? Because
sure.
there's a lot of people we work with on the inside
Hmm.
that are thinking, is it worth investing my time to get my GED?
Hmm.
So could you share, what did it feel like when you achieved your GED? Was it on the inside? Did it represent anything to you, or was it just another day?
Most definitely, yeah, it definitely represented something to me because, as I said, I dropped out of high school, and so being in that environment where there was, at that point, it was limited opportunities for people to get education, for you to be enrolled in programming. Especially, I was considered as a person with a long term sentence, and so, but I immediately like enrolled myself in GED, and it felt good for me to like. Okay, I set out a goal for myself and I accomplished it within several months. Knew that I had it within me, but still, to set a goal for yourself and then to be able to accomplish it in that type of environment where there is a lot going on a daily basis that will keep you distracted from trying to pursue your educational goals. Yeah, it felt good for me, and I think that was sort of it fueled me to want more. And so after that, I enrolled myself in a paralegal certification course that was being offered by Lewis University at that time. Completed that course, got a paralegal certification, and started frequenting the prison law library a lot. Just one to trying to figure out like things going on in my own case. What I discovered is that I became sort of this mentor for other young black and brown males that I was incarcerated with. They often would come to the law library. I eventually like started working in the prison law library to provide like that mentorship, but also to provide support, whether it was with prison conditions, whether it was for their own criminal appeal cases, or civil issues, human rights issues that was going on within the prison environment. I eventually worked within the prison law library for 14 years of my incarceration. And so I had gained a wealth of knowledge and information and understanding about criminal law, civil law, parental law, family law. I had become a self-taught lawyer while incarcerated, assisted many men with all type of issues. But one thing that stood out to me during that time was that I started to see like this pattern of men that would be released and would return back to prison. Sometimes they were coming back within 30 days, and they would often come see me in the law library for whatever the issue was, whether it was a parole violation or whether they had a new charge or a combination of those things. And I started devising these questions to have conversations with them because one, I wanted to figure out what was causing them to come back because some I was incarcerated with, I knew like we had took up college courses together, and so I knew they were educated, I knew they had skill sets, but they were running into whatever the issues were that caused them to come back. And two, I knew that I would be released one day, and I did not want to encounter whatever it was that was causing them to come back as well. And so started having these conversations from these set of questions that I had devised. And what always bubbled up was these major factors. One, that individuals could not get housing, or they would get housing and then be somehow removed from the housing due to their criminal record that they had just served time for, or they couldn't get employment, or they would get employment and then be terminated because of their criminal record that they had just served time for. And so learning that led me to start studying what collateral barriers are. And these collateral barriers are these policies and laws that have been established and put into practice that were sort of restricting men and women with criminal records from actually like becoming productive citizens. And so you have like one set of laws that says if a person commits a criminal offense, you pay your debt to society, whether it's through a fine or a fee or probation, jail time, or prison time. But then you have another set of laws that says if you get a criminal record, you can't get housing over here, or you can't get employment over here, or you can't get education over here. And so it was a big contradiction to say, like, if you pay your debt to society, but still you have these these long-standing policies that will impact you for the rest of your life that could potentially inhibit you from becoming a productive citizen, and as we've seen, will drive some people back to like survival and committing other criminal offenses. And so before my release, like I knew, like this was my field, this was my passion, this is what I want to do. I not just want to like advocate for myself, but I knew there was countless other men and women. I had family members that had records. I knew people would be released after me that would have records, and like who was advocating for us. And so I knew that I wanted to like utilize what I had learned. I had also obtained my associate's degree. I knew I wanted to take everything that I had acquired while I was incarcerated, my particular skill sets that I had developed, and transfer it upon my release to be an advocate, not just for myself, but for those who also had been going through similar circumstances and had conviction records, and that often felt like their voice was being suppressed by society. And so that's how I came into my passion of this work. And I've been home now. I was released February 11th, 2014. And so I'm actually coming up on 10 years that I've been home now.
And how long did you actually end up serving?
I served so from I know I mentioned that I was sentenced to a 45-year sentence, and so here in the state of Illinois, there are some new laws now, truth and sentencing laws, but I was under a law that was prior to truth and sentencing, where it's called statutorily it's a day for a day. So I got a 45-year sentence for every day that I served, I actually earned a day of good conduct credit. So I actually served out my entire sentence of 45 years. I did 22 and a half years inside of the Illinois State Prison System.
And you released in 2014. So will you take us down your professional path from 2014 until today, which is December of 2023?
Yeah, definitely. And I still want to start like before I was actually released, because I know my reentry process started while on the inside. And so prior to me being released, I knew that I would be paroling out or being released out and on supervised release to another state. I had been through a process what's called interstate compact, had family out in the state of Ohio that I had been in communication with. I knew where I was going to be released to. And so prior to my release, I had prepared like a resume, I had prepared goals, and I often share this story with sometimes with individuals who are prior to coming home or coming home, that I sent out resumes to employers like even before I was released. Like, and sometimes people find that funny, and in a sense it is, but I said that me having a record, employers are going to look me up anyway. They're going to know that I have a conviction record. And so I'm like, I'm going to be proactive from this standpoint. I'm going to send out a few resumes to employers just to let them know like who I am, my particular skill sets. And I had developed a relationship with an attorney that was out in the state of Ohio. And they actually wrote me back and was like, if you're going to be released out here, like look us up once you make it out here. And so once I was released, let's say February 11th, 2014, made it out to Cincinnati, Ohio that same evening. And it was like the next day that I reached out to this legal organization called Ohio Justice and Policy Center. They scheduled an interview for me to come in probably like 2 weeks later. I always remember like I was like fresh out after 2 decades in prison. I was super nervous. They had like a 3 panel interview for me, three attorneys, and still to this day I have good relationships with them. They tell me I seem super confident in that interview, but I know like internally I was nervous, but still able to like articulate my skill sets, what I wanted to do, and it was from that interview that I got offered like to a volunteer position. I went in for a job. They didn't have a position open at the moment, so I offered to volunteer, and that like got me in the door. I volunteered with them probably for like 30 days, where they were offering me a role in their organization. So I started working with them as a paralegal advocate. Started doing justice reform work. We did a lot of work around expungements and record sealing for people with criminal records. We also helped with individuals with records applying for out in the state of Ohio. They have a mechanism called certificates for qualification of employment. We call them CQEs for short. And what those mechanisms did was they were court granted um, certificates that remove employment, legal employment barriers for people to like go into roles that legally they have been restricted from just due to their conviction records. And so we assisted lots of men and women with applying for those. From there, I got trained in restorative justice out there, became an RJ practitioner, started my own trauma informed support group for system impacted people. Back then, I was calling it breaking cycles, and it came out of just my own need for trauma informed resolution, unpacking my own trauma, but also a lot of the clients that I was interacting with at the legal organization had their trauma that they were living with, but didn't have an outlet for it. And so developed this support group that still exists today here in Chicagoland area under the name of People's Liberty Project. I worked out in Ohio for almost 4 years. Within that 4 years, we were able to passed some significant legislation in Ohio, um, known countrywide as like ban the box. And so, what we were able to do in Ohio is ban the box on state applications to remove the question, have you ever been convicted of a criminal offense, off of state job applications. And I think we passed that in 2015, 2016. From there, I moved back here to Illinois. My then fiance was always living here, and so moved back with her. Started working with an organization called Community Renewal Society, which is actually where we met at. I was with that organization I was there, one of their community organizers around criminal justice reform efforts. We were able to move some significant legislation while I was working with that organization. We passed an amendment to the Illinois Human Rights Statute that sort of restricts discrimination for people with records when seeking housing. Um, from from that role, I was sort of recruited um, to join the Justice, Equity, and Opportunity Initiative, which was a newly established initiative that was brought into existence through an executive order of that new administration during that time, under Governor Pritzker and Lieutenant Governor Juliana Stratton administration. The Justice, Equity, and Opportunity Initiative, which is called the JEO for short, um, is a first of its kind here in the state of Illinois, but also like a model throughout the nation. And it centralizes the state justice reform efforts. And so I was recruited to come in as a reentry policy coordinator in 2020. 2020, I always remember it was a month prior to the pandemic. Went into that role on the state level, which I believe is probably a first of its kind person with a criminal background to go into a particular role like this. and the second highest executive office in the state. So we were able to establish, like within my first year, as I say, it was during the COVID pandemic, and we were figuring out some things around reentry. A lot of the state departments have been shut down. People were still being released during this time, and so one of the things that bubbled up is like people need identification still upon being released. Like you need an ID for employment, you need an ID for housing, you need an ID to establish a bank account, and people were being released and these state departments were closed, but people still needed ID. And so we partnered with Secretary of State's office, First Lady M.K. Pritzker's office, and IDOC to develop this pilot program that will provide state identifications for individuals prior to their release. Within a year, we were able to get like all of the IDOC facilities on board and equipped to like take the photographs that's needed, to obtain vital documents that's needed for individuals prior to their release, so that it's not waiting till individuals are out the door and trying to navigate their reentry process, which is, as we know, you're setting people up for failure if you wait till after they're released to start their reentry process. So we were able to get that accomplished. A year later in that role, I eventually was offered the position to become the director of the Justice, Equity, and Opportunity Initiative. And so now I've been in the director role for like 2 years now, 3 years in the lieutenant governor's office. And also I just want to lift up, I also mentioned the trauma informed support group that I run. And so here in Chicagoland area is called a different name, People's Liberty Project, which is this trauma informed support group model for people impacted by the justice system. We use restorative justice practices to help individuals who've been impacted by the system to unpack a lot of the trauma that we've experienced prior to incarceration, during incarceration, post release, but also provide like that wraparound support system that's needed and resources that's needed for people navigating the reentry process.
So I remember you invited me to participate in that.
Definitely.
And I was, this is before the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
And was it once a month or one Saturday a month?
First Saturday of the month.
And we would meet, and there would be a group of maybe 20 people, and there would be pizza or whatever there. But really, it was about supporting each other.
Mm-hmm.
It was about listening. And I remember it might have been the first meeting I went to. It really got me. There was a woman who walked in, and as we were sitting in the circle and talking, she just broke down that she had returned, and her daughter, who had matured into an adult while she was away, was unwilling to have anything to do with her. And I still remember that. And the reason I bring that up is because on the inside, we have people around us all the time that are going through this. They're in the same environment as us, and we all have different challenges, but they know what it's like to be incarcerated because they're right there. And as much as our families may love us, if they haven't been on the inside, they really don't know the challenges and the way that we respond to things that are different because of our experience of incarceration. And I say that to say that when you release, if in your community there's some of these support groups available, and I know the whole model changed because of the pandemic. It was no longer us sitting together in a circle. It was seeing a bunch of little squares on a computer screen doing it by Zoom, and obviously in person is better. But I only bring that up to say that as you're thinking about what's my reentry going to look like, part of it should be where can I find support that is really understands what I'm going through. And I would just, based on what Yaacov said, I would just encourage you to find some place in your community that it doesn't have to be a group of 20, it could be a group of 5, but people that have been through that experience where you can share some of the frustrations and challenges and successes that you're having upon your reentry.
Definitely. And can I follow up on something you just mentioned during that circle space where the sister mentioned that like there was a disconnect with her own daughter? And I talked about some of the legal barriers that people are familiar with, but that's a barrier that I often refer to as like one of the hidden barriers of like family reunification. Like I experienced that myself on my own personal level with my son, as I mentioned earlier. When I first got incarcerated, my son was 1 year old. come home 2 decades later, I have a 23-year-old son who has a child of his own, and there's a total disconnect. And so I would often I often want to say to people that are incarcerated, especially serving like long terms, that when you're incarcerated and you're going through whatever that process is of bettering yourself and changing yourself and becoming a different person, people out here are doing the same thing in free society. People are going through their own process of evolution, or they're changing, or they're going through whatever the hardships they're experiencing. But remember that people are changing out here as well, and we have this ideal of what our family will be like once we return. But once we're here, it's like a totally different picture, and I'm still like going through that process of trying to develop a healthy relationship with my son. But it still isn't what I would want it to be. There's still friction there. And so I often want to make people aware, men and women, like when you're incarcerated, to know that it may not be peaches and cream coming home with family members. There's going to be different dynamics that you have to navigate, and be prepared for that. That's what's most important.
And so, to that point, we have family members that are watching and listening to this podcast. That's part of the process, is to share with our friends on the inside, to
Hmm.
let your families know about this. And so, then what's the message to the family, right? What's the message to the family about they love us, they want to help us, but we're not the same person coming
Hmm.
back out if we've served any length of time,
Hmm.
and society has changed. I mean, I know in my own coming out in 2017, I was locked up for about 13 years, and it's a different world.
Hmm.
Communication
Hmm.
is different. When I went away, there were no smartphones, there was no text messaging. I
Hmm.
mean, and it's I'm still adapting. I've been out 6 years.
Mm.
I can't get past that. People don't want to call you and talk to you. They'd rather just shoot you a little
Right.
impersonal message. And
Hmm.
you know, but I think that I think we have things to say to the family, that it's about giving the space and understanding where each other is at in order to fit in.
Hmm.
Um, I think that that's a big part of the process. Is it takes time, and
Most definitely.
I think that you raise a great point. We need to be aware of that. On the inside, we need to be aware that it's probably not going to be just like you walk in and everything is the same, and
Hmm.
you pick up right where you left off. I mean, there's a lot that's gone on during our
Hmm.
time away, and people on the outside have changed just like we've changed while we're on the inside.
Hmm. And so my message to families would be to, if you're going to be that support system that's needed for your loved one that's incarcerated, continue to extend that grace, but also be aware that individuals are coming home. They need a healthy environment. We need a healthy support system in order to navigate the system coming home. And for individuals that's incarcerated, know that your family is going through the same struggles that's out there and trying to support you. And so you have to extend grace as well when you're coming home, sometimes without anything. Some of these prison facilities will give you literally $20 in a bus ticket. And so you're coming home with almost nothing but your mental and spiritual resources and your goals and what you want to do. And I always say, like, definitely prepare yourself prior to your release. The reentry process starts while you're still there. You have to set some goals for yourself before your release, that makes that process a little bit more easier.
One of the Actually, it's my favorite course that we offer is a goal setting course,
Hmm.
because goal setting is a skill, and it's something that we can learn and develop on the inside and really get good at it.
Hmm.
And even if it's small goals, that while I'm here I'm going to do a certain amount of exercise or read a book every week or
Yep.
whatever it might be, but then when I get to the outside, I know how to set goals and then pursue those goals, and it's second nature to me. It's also a great skill to be able to teach our children,
Hmm.
or nieces and nephews or whatever, that here's the way that we can pursue something that's meaningful to us.
Most definitely. And I would also want to add, and I've been lifting this up a lot about the relationship that we have with, in most states, it's called a parole officer. And so I always remember, like prior to my release, and as I mentioned earlier, I knew that I was going to be on an interstate compact to the state of Ohio. And so the parole officer that was assigned to me actually like had to go out to my family's home and survey the home, make sure I was going to a safe environment. And I had my family to get that parole officer's contact information. And so once I obtained it from my family, I like wrote to him because I'm always aware that I'm already aware that these parole agents will only receive information from the Department of Corrections, and most of that information is just going to be have your name, probably your identification number, where you're paroling to, your disciplinary record while you was
Yep.
incarcerated, but nothing productive on what you was doing. And so I wrote to my parole agent. I sent him like all of my accomplishments and wrote him a letter like, "This is who I am," so that you'll have this in addition to
Right.
what the Department of Corrections is having on me. And I always remember the first day I walked into his office, like he shook my hand and told me that no, I think he told me he had been a parole agent for 20 plus years. He said no one had ever wrote him from prison, you know what I'm saying, and gave him that information. And from there, I like set the tone of our relationship where I still communicate with him to this day. I've been off MSR since 2017, and so but I still have a good relationship with. He's a retired parole agent, but just as men, we have a good relationship now, and I think I set the tone by just communicating with him like this is who I am, and I often like want to encourage that to individuals. Like if you're in a correctional facility and you're in a state that you know like the person that's assigned to you as a parole agent, like build some healthy communication with that person because that person will have like they have the power like over your
Absolutely.
how you're navigating that parole term. You know, you want to be in good relationships with that person.
Um, and I will say that we deal with one thing at a time, but probation and parole, there are some aspects of it that are more stressful than incarceration
Mm-hmm.
because
Mm-hmm.
there's always hanging over your head the fear that I could be sent back.
Mm-hmm.
And so Yaacov makes a really great point there. We have to be able to advocate for ourselves because there's nobody that's going to come into the room and speak on our behalf. And that
Mm-hmm.
includes being with a potential employer
Yep.
during the job interview. We have to be able to speak. Here's what I did while I was away so that I'm
Mm-hmm.
prepared for this moment to talk to you to take the job that you're
That's
willing
right.
to offer. And that's something we can work on the inside. We don't
Mm-hmm.
need we need a piece of paper and a pencil to be able to kind of write out what we want to say. But we have to be able to advocate for
Yeah,
ourselves, whether
most
it's with
definitely.
our probation or parole officer, whether it's when we go to a halfway house and we've got to talk to our case manager there
Mm-hmm.
and explain my plan is to take some classes. My plan is to do this. So if we can't do that, it just makes things more challenging. So, Yaacov, I'm going to ask you to kind of wrap us up here and just talk to the men and women on the inside and their families, and maybe just share something with them that will bring a message of hope and inspiration.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. I would want to share that just looking at my experience of going into the system as a 19-year-old and spending 2 decades inside of the prison system and coming out with a plan, but not really knowing where that plan would take me. And now looking at almost 10 years of being home and working now in the lieutenant governor's office as a director and deputy chief of staff within her office. Like, I did not even see that happening, but it was having some concrete plans for myself, having hope for myself, having determination, self determination, but also having people around me that supported me in my goals, people around me that will affirm like this is what I wanted to do. When I often had that self doubt within myself, like you have to have some people around you that are going to like help to move you forward in what you want for yourself. And that's where that family comes in. And it doesn't have to always be blood family. Like I consider you, Augie, as my family. You're my brother. Like, and so having people around you that will support you in your goals and what you want to do is very important, like in that reentry process. And I often say, like, this reentry process is never ending. Like, I think once you're impacted by the system, like you're going to always be impacted by it. We're constantly out here navigating some of the barriers and policies that's been set into place. But I think that's what's the most important for that I want to like leave with. Have hope in yourself, have belief in yourself, but surround yourself with people who believe and support you as well.
Great. Thank you. Thanks for taking your time to be with us. Thanks for sharing your message with those that are watching this. This is the My Path Forward podcast. My name is Augie Delaney, and I am the host. Thank you for joining us, and I'm sure that you found some very interesting and informative things from this conversation. So thank you very much. I hope you've enjoyed the Path Forward podcast series so far. We have much more to come. I want to encourage you to check out our Second Opportunity program with reentry courses through your tablet if you're on the inside, or on the outside, please come to our website and look at the courses. In our next episode, we feature a guest that walked into a center to help him do his resume, and he walked out with a job. It's a great story. I hope you'll tune in to see it.